In Flanders Fields by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up your quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. Okay, here we have the grave in loving memory of Corporal Ernest Ellis Stoddard, enlisted CMB, transferred to the 7th Battalion, I believe that is. He died of his wounds at Vimy Ridge. He's buried in Bigny, France. I believe that's how it's pronounced. So, Ernest Ellis Stoddard. Gonna try to do some research on him and see what we can find out. Ernest Ellis Stoddard, affectionately known as Ernie, was born on May the 12th, 1888, to Walter and Hannah Stoddard in the small coastal village of Clam Harbor on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. Clam Harbor today is a tourist destination located just over an hour's drive northeast of Halifax on the Marine Trail Coastal Drive here in Nova Scotia. The small community is renowned for its gorgeous coastline and its enormous and sprawling provincial park, which features a nearly white sand beach that, fun fact, is host to a yearly sandcastle building competition, which is very cool, and if you're in the region, pop down and check it out. But during Ernie Ellis Stoddard's time here as child, carving out an existence on the eastern shore was a very different looking endeavor. Prior to European contact, the area was thought to be used as a seasonal enclave for the Mi'kmaq indigenous people. Stone artifacts have been found within the boundaries of the modern-day provincial park, dating back as far as 2,500 years, contemporary scholars contend. More modernly, we are beginning to get a sense that there probably has been activity this far east from as early as the end of the last ice age. But that's a topic, potentially, for another video that I would like to make on this channel. Let me know if you guys are interested in my thoughts on that, keeping in mind I'm just some moron. After European arrival to Nova Scotia, Clam Harbor became primarily a fishing village, with the entire economy of the area coming from the sea in one way or another. Clam Harbor was populated in the last quarter of the 18th century, primarily by northern British and Scottish immigrants, fleeing religious persecution back home. It took tremendously hard and dangerous labor from men, women, and children alike just to survive the harsh winters on the barren coast. But families back then really knew how to make the most out of everything. And even though life was certainly tough, they made it a good life. During Ernest's childhood, circa 1900, the Stoddard family built a new home or hotel very near to what is now the main road into the community and the park. But at the time it was just on the side of the Marys River near the shoreline, on a very barren and isolated piece of real estate. The weather near the coastline can get very extreme, with gale force winds prominent year-round and incredibly tough and unforgiving winters, with blizzards most people can't even comprehend. Most any traveling to and from the community during the early part of the 20th century was done by boat via the unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. There are no business records available from 1900 to 1929, but oral history coming from the community and business records starting in 1929 show the hotel was a popular destination for years prior to records being formally kept. During the time from when the hotel was built in approximately 1900 right up until the 1940s, it remained a popular destination for traveling salesmen and businessmen seeking retreat from the big inland cities like Toronto, families from the cities of Halifax or Sydney, and even frequent visitors from the northeastern United States. When they were coming here mostly for the sport fishing and hunting, but also just to get away from the big cities and the pollution. I couldn't find out much about the circumstances of how Ernie ended up on the West Coast, other than he may have been working on the Pacific Railroad as he was a boilermaker. But Ernie enlisted to go overseas to war with the Canadian Expeditionary Force via the Canadian Military Rifles 11th Division from Vancouver, British Columbia on the 6th of April, 1915. There are photos from his time in British Columbia, and judging by the pictures and subsequent letters which were sent to his family, Ernie was trained and spent time in Vernon, British Columbia, prior to boarding a ship and heading to Hell on Earth. Vernon was the site of a large mobilization and training center during and leading up to the First World War. In these photos we see on screen now, we see young men, many of whom would not survive a year overseas. Canada has done a magnificent job of maintaining and digitizing records from our military, and therefore we have lots of documents about Ernie's enlistment, medical history, etc., to look over and ponder. Judging by these documents, Ernie was a young, healthy, 20-something-year-old who was leaving behind what, at the time, was a fairly privileged life on the Eastern Shore, and headed overseas through the gates of hell to protect our freedoms. I will leave links to all the sites where I found photos and information in the description below. After what I'm sure was an arduous journey across the pond on a ship called the SS Lapland, Ernie and a shipload of other young men reached the shores of England. I was unable to find out much about the crossing itself, but it appears the ship disembarked Halifax, which, as an aside, must have been especially heartbreaking, as this was the biggest city close to Ernie's home, and he surely would have come into the city every couple of months for supplies and such. The ship then headed for Liverpool, and it began on July 8th, 1916, arriving on the 25th, which made it a 17-day journey. Details are light, but as you can tell by the documents up on the screen as I speak, we know that Ernie was transferred to the 7th Battalion within a year of his arrival in England or France. According to his service paperwork, which has an itinerary of his expedition to war, circumstances were going to lead to him being at or involved with the Battle of Vimy Ridge, what some historians would contend was Canada's birth by fire, the symbolical departing out of Britain's nest. When I think about this transfer, I like to think that a superior saw something special in the young maritime man, who was probably still naive as to what he was entering into. But like so many other young men at the time, he was ready to answer the call of duty. Before we continue to what happened to Ernie Stoddard after Canada had successfully taken the Hilltop Plateau, I need to take a couple minutes to tell you about the Battle of Vimy Ridge itself, and more broadly the campaign referred to as the Battle of Arras, from the perspective of the Canadians. I want to preface this part of the video by saying that if you are interested in the Great War, its many objectives, campaigns, missions, and personalities, you should seek out better sources than me. I'm just a guy who found a grave and wanted to tell a story about a young man who is from the same part of the earth that I'm from. There are multiple channels devoted to telling the entire story of the Great War here on YouTube, and if this interests you, you should seek out information about it from reputable sources. With that out of the way, let's get into the campaign broadly. Vimy Ridge is an escarpment, and it's located northwest of the city of Arras. This part of France, which is north of Paris, was located on the German Hindenburg defensive line. During this period between 1917, the line was at its most formidable, as it was occupied by fresh German forces who were bent on defending it. Before the arrival of the Canadians to storm the ridge at Vimy, the fighting in the area was predominantly British 1st and 3rd Armies versus the German 6th Armies. After a push by the British, with a mission of breaking clean through the Hindenburg Line, ended in a prolonged stalemate, which ended up costing the British about 125,000 casualties and 160,000 casualties for the Germans. The front was protracted and it was broad. What was needed was a spear to break through the fortified entrenchment on this large ridge, and the Canadians were to be the tip of that spear. Before we continue, I want to add that I'm skipping over a lot of very pertinent information about this campaign, including how air superiority and artillery dominance played a vital role in Canada being able to go over the top and take the hill, and also very interesting stories of impromptu decision-making, individual heroism, and other circumstances which played a defining role in the success of the campaign. I hope this video piques your curiosity enough to go and research it, as any society which forgets its history is doomed to repeat it. But nevertheless, let's now hone in on the main period of focus, the 9th of April 1917 through the 12th of April 1917. Quote, "Chaps, you shall go over exactly like a railroad train, on time, or you shall be annihilated." Canadian Corps Commander Sir Julian Byng. Sometime between the end of March and the beginning of April in 1917, the Canadian Corps were ordered to assault and seize the high ground at Vimy Ridge. The ridge was heavily fortified, and the Canadians were going in over what was described as an open graveyard, as previous assaults by Canadian, French, and British troops had been halted and resulted in over 100,000 casualties. In preparation for the assault, the Canadians did extensive planning, research, modeling, and training. Canadian Royal Engineers also dug tunnels from the rear of the front to as close to the front of the front as possible. Because of the geography of the area, the German fortified positions commanded the high ground over several kilometers of Allied lines, granting them superiority of position. This also meant a greatly reduced chance of utilizing an attack with the element of surprise. For nearly 2 weeks prior to the assault, the Allies haunted the enemy positions from afar with the use of new 106 fuses, which were designed to detonate on contact instead of burying prior to explosion. These shells could constitute a video of their own, by the way. With a near limitless supply of this new missile, along with new tactics and aiming advancements, the British and Canadians could rain down hell on the enemy at a moment's notice. And they did just that. This helped weaken and destroy enemy defenses and barriers, such as the greatly feared barbed wire. But more importantly, these guns would lay down support to soften the German positions during the initial attack. At 5:30 a.m. on the 9th of April 1917, Easter Monday, 4 full divisions of Canadian infantry, about 15,000 men, stormed the front and overwhelmed the entrenched German forces along a large swath of the line. Even with the supporting artillery barrages and a fast strike, the Germans were able to man machine gun posts and lay down suppressive fire. The Canadians continued moving forward. During this initial attack, countless acts of heroism, courage, bravery, and sacrifice were later recounted. Hill 145, where the Canadian monument sits imposing over the landscape today, was eventually captured with a daring frontal bayonet charge into opposing machine gun fire. Although this initial push was a success, it would take 3 more days of operations to capture and hold the position. This victory came at an immense cost, as nearly 4,000 Canadian men lost their lives in that 3-day period. Today, the aforementioned Vimy Ridge monument stands guard over the landscape and is a constant reminder and memorial for the more than 11,000 Canadians who left their blood in the soil of northern France, who would live on in memory alone. In 1922, the French government permanently and absolutely ceded the land surrounding Vimy Ridge to Canada for their sacrifice. I know you're probably tired of hearing this at this point, but I want to reiterate just one more time This is far from an in-depth look at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. I am leaving out information because this topic is so extensive, it deserves its own standalone video, even video series. If you guys enjoy this mini documentary, which by the way is the first one I've ever made, please let me know by leaving a comment down below, liking and sharing the video. You should also subscribe to my channel, as I have big plans for the very near future. With that out of the way, if this video about World War I interests you, please click through the links I have provided below, and take some time to read about this conflict. We're not done yet, but this is very important information, and if I may opine, has many parallels to the world we live in today. Now that we have an understanding about what was happening during Vimy Ridge and leading up to April of 1917, let's get back to Ernie and piece together what would happen in the coming 3 weeks, which were to be the last 3 weeks of his short life. After the initial attack and subsequent capturing of the high ground of Vimy Ridge, the Allies still had lots of work to undertake to successfully cement their new gains and ultimately defend this new position. I could not find out a whole lot about the exact circumstances of where Ernie was, or what exactly he and his company's missions or orders were at the time. But this letter that was sent from the field to Ernie's mother back home is the closest I could come to the story about what was happening when Ernie was killed in action, somewhere atop that barren ridge, more than 5,000 kilometers from home. 10th of June, 1917. Dear Mrs. Stoddard, Corporal Stoddard was hit by a shell that buried him and wounded him in the head and neck. He was on duty keeping a sharp lookout over the parapet. The boys say he was always very keen on doing his duty well. He was unconscious when taken out to the aid post, where he was dressed and taken to the ambulance. He must have regained consciousness, as he was taken on to the clearing station, which is many miles in the rear. He would be buried near the clearing station. I am writing to the chaplain of the clearing station, asking him to write to you. Please accept the expression of my sincere condolences. Yours sincerely, S. Madden, R.C. Chaplain. 11th of June, 1917. Dear Mrs. Stoddard, your son, Private E. E. Stoddard, was admitted here on the 28th of April and died the same day. He was mortally wounded in the head and was quite unconscious on a mission, and remained so till the end, so he could not send any messages. I cannot tell you in which battle he received his wounds, but it was during the Great Push, after the capture of Vimy Ridge, in which the Canadians did so wonderfully. He is buried in the Soldiers' Cemetery of Aubigny, row 9, number 66. You have called your son private, but he had been promoted to corporal. His belongings will reach you in due time through the official channels. And I couldn't find the rest of the letter. There was also a letter sent to what I believe, but am unsure, was Ernie's sister, and it reads, Dear Miss Stoddard, I have been going to write you for the last few days, and really do not know what to say, for on coming out of the hospital, I learned of Ernie being killed. I know just how greatly you must suffer on losing such a brother, when all who knew him feel the loss as greatly as if he were a near relative. I was over to the 7th Battalion yesterday, and every one of the boys first spoke to me about him, how brave he was, and how he practically saved the day for his company a few days before he was killed. They all told me of the officers recommending him for military honors and a commission for gallantry in the field. If I was to have my only brother, I could not feel it more keenly than I do at his loss, for since we were in the 11th CMR together, we formed a very close friendship indeed. He had my great admiration for his many virtues, no matter in what company or circumstances he was placed in, and was the truest man to his friends I have ever known. Yours is a great loss, but the country's loss is great also. For the loss of a true soldier of his caliber will be felt, for no better shouldered the burdens of a cavalier for truth and the betterment of mankind, which we are now out in France fighting for. Such men as Ernie Stoddard make up the history of the Canadian Army and add to the many laurels won for Canada at such a cruel price, the greatest sacrifice, that of his life. We all sympathize with you and Mrs. Stoddard, and I trust we shall meet in the great beyond, where all sorries, wars, and wrongdoing and partings will be at an end. I was over to see him in April, and we had a good long talk together. He told me of you not getting mine, and that's the end of what I could find. Reading these letters really gives me a better sense of the person Ernie was, and it's a person I, for one, am very lucky to know well and to understand. The Canadian Maritimer. The line that hit me the most was, "He had my great admiration for his many virtues, no matter in what company or circumstances he was placed in, and was the truest man to his friends I have ever known." I could hardly put it in words better myself to encapsulate the essence of a maritimer. I would only add in family, and that even a stranger is a friend to most of us. Judging by the letters, Ernie was involved in a push towards a holdout German position near the ridge when his company was hit by artillery fire. It sounds as if Ernie was hit rather directly and went down fast and quickly. It must have been incredibly harrowing running towards the sound of gunfire and explosions, with the smell of freshly exploded powder in the air, and a mist of fresh earth mixed with blood falling from the sky, due to the artillery pounding the ground through hordes of young men, all with stories very similar to that of which I've told you today about Ernie. It also sounds as if Ernie was posthumously promoted to corporal. Now fast forward just over 100 years, and because of my metal detecting adventures and curiosity about a beautiful gravestone, well deserved, I was fortunate enough to notice Ernie's grave and able to tell you his story, as well as learn it for myself here today. If you take anything away from this video today, it's that when wars grow to be global in scale, there isn't an end to the earth that it won't reach out and affect. And behind every war are millions of Ernies, young men who had more to give this earth than just their blood in the soil. If you enjoyed this new style of video from me, please like the video and comment, and let me know that you would like to see more of these. There is no shortage of stories that need telling, similar to Ernest Ellis Stoddard's story. If you like these videos, it would also mean a lot to me if you would subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notified whenever I upload a new video. And I think my outro is especially prescient today. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, peace.